I'm from Rotherhithe, like South East London.
Lovely place.
I do a podcast, and I do like called Tales from a Disappearing City.
Oh wow!
And we did
fucking sure.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about obviously all the culture that's disappearing.
Yeah. Erased.
Yeah.
But
me and a mate were doing a piece about a place called the Crunchy Frog, which I believe you visited.
That's a pub in there on the river, isn't it?
Well, this is
that run by a boxer?
It was an old theatre art centre. Like, I don't know if you remember this, but allegedly, when the first place you went to rehearse for the Pistols was the Crunchy Frog by Rotherhithe. There's a story. This is why I wanted to ask you directly.
If ever that would be the second, the first was the warehouse. Nobody turns up there.
Yeah, that was the one there. That was the Crunchy Frog. Do you remember? Yeah.
Oh, well, I was the only one, so hello. Can I claim precedence?
Do you remember that though?
I remember walking around there at night, looking like I'm not going to be too loved in this fucking neighbourhood.
Well, it's a rough old fucking gaff, mate. Yeah, it's a rough old area.
Yeah.
You know.
And I proper North London survived.
Yeah, well, it's a middle area, isn't it? Yeah.
So what? There are a lot of them.
But did you go back and rehearse it after that, or was that the only time at the warehouse?
Any time. Yeah.
Oh, right. Because Julian Temple.
From there on, it was pubs in Battersea.
Yeah. Because Julian Temple tells his story.
Oh, fuck him, he's a liar.
Is he a liar? He tells a story about walking around there. Really?
Yeah.
Is he full of shit?
Yeah.
All right, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason we come here in the first place, Neil, was because of the Crunchy Frog. And the Crunchy Frog has a small but very important place in the history of punk rock and the Sex Pistols. What's the starting point of that?
The first time I heard of this was I was reading the John Savage book, England's Dreaming, and there's a little bit in there where he talks about Lydon going, like the first proper rehearsal for the Sex Pistols. I mean, like Lydon had met the band at the Roebuck pub in the King's Road in Chelsea. They'd had like a little audition at McLaren and Westwood's shop, Sex, around the corner, where Lydon's miming along to 18. And then they arranged a rehearsal the following Sunday, I believe. And in John Savage's book, it talks about this place, the Crunchy Frog in Rotherhithe. I don't know, when did this book come out? It was over 10 years ago anyway, wasn't it? The Savage book. Yeah. But I remember at the time, I was like, what the fuck is this place? I never heard of it. I live in Rotherhithe. What is the Crunchy Frog? And I remember Googling at the time, and virtually nothing come up about the Crunchy Frog. All you got was like some, it's a dodgy Monty Python sketch, about chocolates where the Crunchy Frog. Anyway, so I was sort of intrigued. What's the Crunchy Frog? How's that link in with the Sex Pistols? But over the last few years, a little bit more has come out in like a few sort of books. But basically, the story goes from, and this is from like Glenn Matlock, Steve Jones, and Lydon himself. Basically, he travelled to Rotherhithe to his first rehearsal with the Sex Pistols. He called it the Warehouse, but like it was known as the Crunchy Frog. And he turned up with his new potential bandmates for like I said, the first rehearsal. And he was with his mate John Gray, travelling to South London on the Sunday. And guess what? No one turned up. And he was like furious, went a bit mental, was like, oh fuck this band, blah blah blah. Went home back to Finsbury Park, and then like the next day, Glenn Matlock phoned him up saying, oh, you know, sorry about this. And Lydon's like, I'll kill you, I'll fucking kill you, I'll come round with a hammer. And like Steve Jones, Paul Cook, they'd thought, oh, you know, they'd met Lydon in the Roebuck like a few days earlier, and like, already at the start there's this sort of thing, they're thinking, oh, like, well, fuck this guy, I can't be bothered to schlep over to South London from West London to do it. And then I think Matlock said he was worried about getting a jumping the fares and all that.
To pay for the tube, yeah. I mean, I suppose to put it in context, that was quite a critical period in the history of the Sex Pistols. I mean, the band that very nearly didn't happen in the way they ultimately did happen. So the members, Paul Cook, Steve Jones and Glenn Matlock, had kind of been put together with the encouragement of Malcolm McLaren, of course. And they've been rehearsing together for a while, but they've been trying out various different lead singers, hadn't they? And I think by this point, there was a guy called David Harrison they were trying out, potentially the lead singer.
There's some sort of debate whether like Lydon actually, you know, because they used the Crunchy Frog, like the warehouse space by the river, for like some of their early rehearsals, but this is pre-Lydon. And like I said, they used him with David Harrison. I mean, they met through McLaren. He was a bit of a pretty boy, wasn't he? Like David Harrison. I don't think he really gelled again with the rest of the band. I mean, you know, there was something. What were you saying? There was something that he saw. He saw down by the river that kind of like
myself. He was a fellow ornithologist, and he does say that he wasn't very cool, you know, trying out to be in his kind of hard band, and he was coming up to Rotherhithe, looking out and saying, "Oh, look, there's a cormorant."
Yeah.
That didn't go down too well.
Cormorants aren't punk rock, are they, really? Yeah, so I mean, they had been trying out all these different sort of singers. I mean, there's that story about Midge Ure, them travelling up to Glasgow and asking Midge Ure and trying to, McLaren and Jones trying to sell him like a dodgy amp out of the back of a car. Yeah. And he's like, oh no, fuck that.
So David Harrison went on to be quite a reasonably successful artist in his own right. He's a friend of the painter Peter Doig, but he wasn't really cut out to be a Sex Pistol, as it seemed at the time. So then they found Lydon, and this was his first tryout, and it didn't happen. So I guess we have to say that really the Sex Pistols, as it became known, came within a hair's breadth of not happening at all, because presumably Lydon could have just turned around then and walked away.
Well, I mean, that is more or less what he said, and then I think he had to be convinced, and like they eventually did some rehearsals. There was a pub in where was it, in Wandsworth, or
the Rose and Crown, wasn't it?
Yeah, so like in the following week they managed to do that, and I've heard the stories as well. They were renting a room above a pub, and apparently like they all started rehearsing there, and like all the punters in the pub were like started moaning about them being too loud, like playing their music, and they're like, well look, we fucking paid for this, you know. So anyway, like, you know, it was the early days of trying to get the band together. But yeah, basically I think from the start the original members of the Sex Pistols, particularly like Jones and Paul Cook, didn't really like Lydon, you know. I mean, we'd say like maybe like the Sex Pistols at the start, they were kind of trying to be like some pub rock and roll band playing fast rock and roll, Faces or like Dr. Feelgood or that sort of sound. Without someone like Lydon, do you think they would have been like what they were, or?
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of begs the question, would there have been a Sex Pistols without John Lydon? And actually we don't have to kind of hypothesise about that, because after Lydon left the Sex Pistols, they did actually carry on and do a whole other album. Who listens to that now?
No, exactly,
Who Killed Bambi and all that shit.
No.
So I think, you know...
I love the Black Arabs on that album, the disco version, but that's just me.
Yeah, okay, there's a few classics on there. The My Way version, you know, has its own appeal, but, you know, the Sex Pistols really was the band with Lydon as the lead singer, and if he'd walked away at that point, what would have been left with it probably would have been something like a kind of English New York Dolls cover band, or maybe not a cover band, but that kind of, you know, looked good attitude, but musically...
Would have been like a poppy pub rock, Faces, rock and roll sort of band. And again, love or hate Lydon, like again, he was like, you know, like John Gray, like Lydon's mate, had said that basically if it was up to, if Lydon had been allowed to do the music for the Sex Pistols, they'd been unlistenable. I mean, he was listening to all like loads of krautrock, Can, and like people like Peter Hamill and all sorts, Captain Beefheart. You know, he would have made them unlistenable. So in one way, you had that tension from the start of someone like Lydon being quite obstreperous and like quite like in your face, but almost like the tension between the members of the band. Most of them are like, you know, Glenn Matlock with his trying to do his Beatles melodies and great songwriter and writing his songs, and Paul Cook and Steve Jones just want him to be in the Faces. Then Lydon just wanted to be in some like acid freak out 70s weird out band. For what, again, sometimes by the synchronicity or the luck or whatever, that was the perfect combination. But obviously you could see maybe the faults of that band straight away. They're not going to make like 5 albums, you know. Maybe the fact that they made one amazing album.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's a bit of a Marmite character at the time and since, but you know, he's kind of, I see him as being like the kind of the grit in the oyster, without which there really wouldn't be much of a band. And equally on his own, there wouldn't be much of a band either. I mean, obviously Glenn Matlock, the original bassist, wrote most of their good tunes, literally in terms of melodies.
I mean, Lydon wrote the lyrics, I would say,
and the whole kind of power chords and all the Steve Jones and Paul Cook, the drum engineer, that whole kind of powerful bass on which to have it, Lydon's lyrics above it, was very powerful. But
I mean,
without all those elements, it wouldn't have amounted to much.
One thing I'll say is what happened post Sex Pistols, the music that the other lot did was not really all that. Rich Kids was alright, and and Steve Jones, there's some appalling sort of rock stuff he did at the end of the 80s. Yeah. Whereas Lydon went off to do Public Image, and I still think the first couple of Public Image albums are some of the most amazing records, really ahead of the game. Yeah. So it's one of them. Sex Pistols started in South East London, sort of.
This clip is from an hour-long episode of Drifting Through the Streets. Link in the description if you want to hear more about early punk in Rotherhithe, as well as some great Crunchy Frog stories. I also do a podcast called Tales of a Disappearing City, with lots more subcultural history, from punk to acid house, squats and free parties, to rave and jungle. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to see more.